the stat's even worse than you probably had either thought or imagined. It's 90% of podcasters who start a podcast do not make it to episode 3. If you only record or only have ever recorded 20 episodes of your podcast, you are like 0.001% of the podcast world. And I don't know the exact number, but I know there's another one, like the number of podcasts that either reach 100 or 150. It's basically like no one. This is like 0.00001%.
And welcome to another episode of Mess to Mission. And this episode is also, I feel like, a long time coming. Shout out to Taylor Swift, because we have actually been oddly internet friends for I feel like a good bit. And we've tried to schedule this episode. But today you are going to hear from my friend Michael and about his Mess to Mission story. And actually, he is deep into the podcast world. And we're comparing notes on podcast editing and all of those things. So, Michael, thank you so much for being here today and being willing to talk about kind of your journey and how you got started and what you do. So, we would love to learn more about you.
Thank you. Yeah, as they say, third time's the charm. I think this is our third
Yes.
time with this across, family issues and sicknesses and kids' illnesses. It happens.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you are well aware. And that was part of the delay. But yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about kind of your journey. So you're doing podcast editing and helping other entrepreneurs kind of on this podcast journey, but tell us a little bit about you and kind of what your mess was or how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, so I think my kind of journey, I never really considered myself, I guess, an entrepreneur, but I think I've always had that kind of like mentality. Like I was an Uber driver for many years, and I've always had kind of like some side stuff going on. And I had been listening to podcasts for many years. I kind of liked the forum that you can just kind of listen to that audio kind of stories. So probably back in like 2017, 2018 kind of range. But at that time, there wasn't really the technology and there wasn't a lot of people doing it themselves on their own. A friend of mine had started a podcast, I think I want to say 2019 or 18, somewhere in that range. And I went on his podcast. So I kind of learned like what it's about, like if you want to do something on your own. And then in 2020, in the middle of COVID, I had been working in healthcare for quite some time, for my whole life. And then I was let go from that position. And after that, it kind of gave me some opportunity to think like, what's next for my life and what opportunities are there out for me? And so I started a podcast on my own just to, get a message out there and kind of creating content. And then it just kind of evolved from there. You learn what's needed and necessary to host and run a podcast on your own. I'm sure there are lots of things that you do and have to figure out, what works and what doesn't. And you learn as you go along. And then as that process continued along, then I had people reach out to me and say like, hey, I see you're doing something on your own. I'm interested in doing this myself. Or, hey, I just need a little bit of help with my production. Would you mind helping me with doing any kind of editing? And then my business has grown from there.
I love it. I think that it's so intimidating to start a podcast too, because in the beginning, you feel like you need the big fancy $400 microphone and you feel like you need the big system and the big background and all of that. And while those things are great, they're always not financially accessible, as most people are aware. And then the editing is so intimidating. Like creating an intro about sent me to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ himself, because I was so annoyed with trying to figure out background, what you can use, what you can't use. You can't just pick anybody's jingle for your podcast because there's rights and all these things. And so all of that can, I think, be overwhelming. So how did you kind of learn, or what were the best ways that you learned the ins and outs of that business, or maybe share something that most people wouldn't have thought about that you were like, oh, this is very important?
So you make a really good point about the technology. We can hit on that to start with. And you're right that a lot of people overcomplicate a lot of things, podcasts being one of them. I literally started with those Apple headphones that plug into your computer, a laptop, and recorded it in my closet, because a closet is one of the best places to record a podcast because it contains all of that sound and it just makes it sound a lot better compared to an open air room. And so you really, as you said, you don't need a lot of technology to start. I mean, you probably already have all those things that you would need to start a podcast already: a computer, headphones, and that's really about it.
And internet, that's all you got.
And you already have all those things. And so, yeah, the next step might be editing. And I mean, now there are more AI tools that you can learn or do it automatically for you. I learned on something called GarageBand. But really, if you think about it, it's going back to the old adage of like YouTube University. And it was more like, so either asking my friend, like, how do you actually start a podcast? So people have blogs and things online that you could reach and read about, or for learning how to edit on GarageBand, I just really Googled it and found it on YouTube and just read and watched a couple things and then learned those tips on my own and just went from there. So a lot of it, you can learn on your own. You don't need a lot of support, and it's just really sitting down and just having that time to figure it out on your own.
Okay, well, I'm first super intimidated by GarageBand, so let's start there because there is not a chance in God's green earth would I be trying to do a podcast. So shout out to you and your patience because that is not something that I would be able to do. I don't even remember how I figured out. I mean, I'm with you. There's so many free resources, and instead of paying astronomical amounts for these podcast gurus and things like that, I mean, I think I just mainly with blogs that I dove into, and then I found something to put intro music on and kind of edit it together. And you and I have had discussions, and I've said previously on the podcast that I've used Riverside and all of that. So the technology has come a long way. So when was the moment that you realized I can do this full time as a business, or I can make this into a bigger business opportunity?
Think the people so I really focus on like business owners who have a podcast that don't have the time, the wherewithal, or the maybe patience, I guess, maybe a better word as well. There are a lot of components to putting a podcast together, and some you can certainly do on your own and you can learn. And so, what I always come back to is your time valuable enough? Let's say in a week, your podcast workflow might be, well, I'm just going to make a ballpark, 4 hours, we'll say, with research, recording, editing, publishing, because there is some little bit of time as well as things are getting ready when you're having to upload and things. You can do stuff in the background that's happening. But is 4 hours out of your work week enough to justify doing it on your own and wasting that time? Because at the end of the day, everyone only has 24 hours in a day. Are they more willing to just give that to someone else to take over, because during those 4 hours they could be taking client calls and finding more clients and those types of things? For me, it's always been kind of like that ROI, that I feel like I can help a podcaster do the work and all that minutia and background probably better than they can, and it saves them way more time and just that knowledge to know that there's a ton of those people out there that need or want support, and all you have to do is just be patient and just having to find those people to come into your world.
Yeah. So I'm super operationally heavy minded. No surprise to anyone who is listening. So if I'm having my podcast and I want to work with you, tell us a little bit about what that looks like. I've never used, it's just been me, myself, and I over there. I do find a lot of joy in kind of curating my podcast and things of that nature. So for somebody who's never utilized this service, or somebody has never outsourced their podcast, how does that look operationally? I record and then email it to you, and you kind of tell me about the things that you handle.
Yeah. So essentially is really just you record and that's all you have to worry about. So your workflow goes from 4 hours a week down to say an hour a week, because I can't record for you. Obviously, you're the voice behind the business. So that shrinks from 4 hours down to one. So we would come up with basically a schedule for you on how many episodes you're putting out a month, and either have some sort of workflow, whether it be like a Google sheet, a Trello board to keep track of what episodes are being published when, and where we upload that either directly into like a Google Drive or in just having passwords to get into your wherever you're recording, Riverside, and I can download those and get it all ready. And essentially, once that's done, it's off your books that you don't have to worry about it anymore.
I love that. I think that, like you said, it's about time management. And I talk all the time about delegating something that doesn't bring you joy, or giving it to somebody who that's their passion, or having it in that space. So you've built a successful business around, obviously, your passion for podcasting and helping business owners in this space. What's one thing that you wish you would have known prior to being an entrepreneur?
So I think one thing I'm kind of struggling with more recently, and I mean, you probably are much better at this than I am. Like, I'm really good at like editing and finding a way to improve audio quality, and oh, this is not working here. I'm going to dig in and just find that a little more. But where I think I probably struggle more so on my end is like that business side of things, of like working on your business and having better workflow on my end, and what is considered a priority, what will actually move the business, rather than like, hey, if you need someone to edit your podcast, I'm your guy. But if you want to talk about business and things, that is where I probably struggle a little bit more. Being kind of self-taught, like I understand the podcast business side of things and sort of the clarity of the message and like how to build a good message and how it can support your own business. But on like my own back end business, I probably struggle with what are the proper tools that are needed, and being able to like structure pricing and the deliverables and those kind of things. So that's probably where I probably struggle with the most on my own personal business.
I appreciate I appreciate that transparency, because I think there's such to be said about, a lot of people think, "Oh, I'm going to start this business and I'm going to get these clients." And then the first thing I feel like always to go is your own business. You
Mhm.
don't have the systems in place, you don't, and then you time block for all these amazing clients, which is great, but then it's like, shoot, I still have to promote myself. I still have
Mhm.
to do my own bookkeeping. I still have to do all of these things, or have them set up in the background, and that too takes time. So I think that that is, everyone says, you when you start working in your business and not on your business, that's the first thing that you lose, is
Mhm.
kind of that time and that space to sit down and create your own strategy of, where do I want my business to go? What do I want to do? Because you're thick in the editing, or building out a system, or helping somebody operationally, and then it's like, I haven't posted in social media all week. Like, I need to go out and continue to promote and sell myself to pay my bills as well.
So that's something I really struggled with. And I kind of came to that realization about a week ago. And so, I mean, for transparency purposes, we talked about like kids and things. So like I had reserved last Thursday as a day that I could really catch up on a lot of the client editing that I needed to do. And our child got sick. And so now that day is gone. I mean, I had the evening and things, but during the day that I had that time pretty much 100% reserved to be able to edit and catch up on those things, gone. Now I'm behind, and I have certain deadlines that I'm trying to meet for my clients. And I have another client that I'm launching her podcast quite soon. And I have certain deadlines for that. And I feel like all these balls that are juggling, and I'm losing on, I want to give a good client experience to these people and also meeting certain deadlines as well. And so luckily I kind of reserve some time on the weekend to be able to work on these things and catch up a little bit more. So I felt more comfortable going into that time. But it kind of was a good self reflection that I said, maybe some of the client structures that I have in place aren't actually serving me. Like they're loving the service that I'm doing, and it, I know it's needed, but can I pull myself back to say, how can I structure this a whole lot better to actually support the business? So like you said, that I actually have the time to be able to sit down and create some more content for my own business. I'm creating all this content for other people, and that's great. And it technically does bring in profit to the business. But at the end of the day, you kind of get static because you only have a certain amount of clients that you currently have. And content really is the name of the game, I'm sure you're aware of, to get more people. And if I'm not doing that for my business, how can I really grow? So that is really kind of a struggle that I had over these last 2 weeks, and some self-reflection to come back to say, do these contracts actually make sense? Can I give myself a lot more time for these deliverables so that I have more time in the business? When things do break, or kids get sick, or I get sick, or maybe I want to take a day off here and there, all those things are things that I'm working on, and certainly could get a lot better at as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny to me because, everybody gets into entrepreneurship for the time freedom. And it's like, in those
Right.
first couple of years, people don't just hand you $1 million checks and you just jump on a boat to go overseas. And now you're on Instagram making all this content and laissez. Like, I think there's a skewed version of entrepreneurship on some forms of Instagram because the content creators are making all this money and they're out here and they're promoting all the things, and you get into entrepreneurship to start your business, but then the kids do get sick. Well, now you're working a weekend and you're not on a 9 to 5 schedule where you're turned it off because you've committed to a deadline. So you have to be really strategic and organized in that sense because you have to be pivoting constantly, especially if you have kids in the house. We both have sickness and moving houses and all these different things and trying to pivot and prioritize. But definitely one thing that I'm passionate about is setting up your systems in the front end to kind of give you that grace in the back end. But I don't think enough people speak about the importance of it because you want to take a vacation. That's the goal of starting your business, is to be on the boat doing family things or what have you, or being able to spend extra time logged out and very present. And that can often be a struggle.
Something you just said, and I bring it back to podcasting for a minute, not the back end business things, I think would be really helpful. I think that's also something that a lot of podcasters really struggle with as well, that they have this idea that they're going to start a podcast and they're going to become famous. And we have this skewed thing about content creators. I mean, so you have Instagram creators, but you also have podcast creators. And there's a lot of them out there who make either part of their business, or they make a lot of money from their podcast in terms of ad revenue. And I think a lot of podcasters get into it and they get the message wrong. And that's not the name of the game for what should be probably most people. I don't know, 90% of them. And they're not going to make their money off of it. And they go about this all completely wrong. And then they end up failing because they end up quitting because they're not making any ad revenue.
Well, didn't don't I'm sure you know the statistics better than I do, but there was something that said like it's like a ridiculous amount of podcasts don't make it past 50 episodes or don't make it even past 10 episodes because people jump into it thinking it's going to be quick, easy, painless. I mean, you're just going to get on here and record, and you can make it that way. So a lot of people don't make it that way, but you can make it that way. But they think that, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and millions of people are going to find my show and it's going to have all these downloads. And it takes time and audience building. And then even for your podcast, you still have to have content now to supplement the podcast. So the two going hand to hand, it's just, you're constantly evolving, constantly growing, and it's not, if it was quick cash, people, that would be amazing, but I don't know can stand behind that precedent.
So the stats even worse than you probably had either thought or imagined. It's 90% of podcasters who start a podcast do not make it to episode 3. They don't make it past episode 3. So they only record one, 2 or 3 episodes. So of the 10%
Interesting.
of the 10% that are left, 90% of that group do not make it past episode 20. So if you only record or only have ever recorded 20 episodes of your podcast, you are like 0.001% of the podcast world. And I don't know the exact number, but I know there's another one, like the number of podcasts that either reach 100 or 150. It's basically like no one. This is like 0.00001%. I would love to do it one day. Like go on and just search for these random podcasts, and there's just this graveyard of dead podcasts that are out there because they don't ever, because once you publish it goes out and it doesn't, you can't delete it, and they stay there, and there are hundreds, thousands, millions potentially of them that are just out there that people started and then never went anywhere with it, and it's dead.
That's crazy. Well, I feel a little cooler with my like 110 episodes. So I'm on the up and up. I'm on the up and up. But I mean, it's been years. Like this is year 2, almost 3, and I'm just now because I don't I set my expectation. I'm not releasing more than one episode a week. I don't have the brain space. I'm not a dual episode of the week kind, and I think that that for me is too much. So to be able, you have to be able to even reach those numbers, you have to be super consistent in your structure, your recording, your systems, making sure that the editing and all of that, you kind of have to start with the system, I think, in the beginning, or you're not going to reach those episodes regardless, because for a lot of people, recording one episode for 20 straight weeks or 100 straight weeks, if you don't consider batch recording, that's a lot. That's a lot of getting things coordinated and done and flipped over in a less than 7 week or 7 day time span.
Talking about editing and kind of going back to some of the things we talked at the start, I think another thing that podcasters struggle with is and it's probably the case with most things in life, you just, this perfection mentality. And it's just the example of done is better than perfect. And for most people, your dog barks in the background. Most people are going to not really care. I'm going to listen to it and say, oh, I could have fixed that. But that's besides the point. That's, I
Yeah.
am. But like, does it really matter that those things happen? And as long as you're really putting out good content, that's more important for what your audience wants to listen to. And then you can worry about all of the perfection of the intro and the outro and all those music things that you talked about earlier that you struggled with, and making the audio sound a little bit better. Those things in the start, I probably would just say ignore them and just concentrate on having good content, getting really niche down and wherever you want to take that podcast, and finding, like you said, like a good workflow and the balance of being able to consistently put content out there, however often works for you, and just sticking with that for forever, really, but as long as possible, really.
Yeah. There's something to be said, like you said, about the perfectionistic versus done. And it's so funny to me because I mean, like I said, I'm closer to 110-ish episodes because I batch record. I've
Mm-hmm.
had people show up in suits. I've had people show up in pajamas. I've had people show up in their kids. I've had a lady do a full episode with a construction crew, jackhammering her life away behind her. And that one took probably the most editing I've ever had to do because it was like audio chaos. But I think that that's why a lot of people don't do it, or they don't guess, because it's got to be the perfect environment. It's got to be the perfect this. I've had people say, am I allowed to drink water on your show? Well, if you're thirsty, I would hope that you would drink the water and just not simply decease because water seems like a, but it's funny to me because I wonder, I often think about, other shows, if they're setting these expectations of show up in a suit and you're not allowed to drink water and you're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to talk about this. I'd rather be a podcast that's come as you are, say what you need. We can go as deep into your mess or as not deep into your mess if it's traumatic, and we can edit things out or move along the way because there's often times that even my friend Sarah was laughing because in one of my previous ones, the toddler swings open the door, shows himself on the show. I just kept it, and at this point, everyone knows he's chaotic. But I think that you're correct in saying that people shy away from those things because they have this invisible standard that they're never going to meet.
Right. And because like this is not recorded live. I mean, we are recording live, but
Yes.
it's not going to be published live. You have every opportunity to edit it. If you say something that maybe shouldn't have been said, I can get rid of that. If you make a mistake, you can edit that. The dog box barks in the background, that also can be edited out. So if you make mistakes while you're going along, you don't need to be perfect, and that can be fixed in post production. And there's lots of tools that can be fixed for audio quality and those kind of things. But as you said, like, you really need just to be focused on trying to be consistent in that workflow and being as consistent as you can, putting out that content as much as possible.
I love that. So, how can audience members connect with you further? If they're saying, hey, I've got this podcast, I don't want to fool with the editing, I would love your help, I recommend 10 out of 10, how can they connect with you further and where can they find you?
Yeah, the best place is probably on Instagram. It's kind of where I hang out the most, although Threads does allow you to
So
send
good.
messages these days. Both of them, I could be found there, underscore Mike Nielsen. And most people will probably spell that name wrong. I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes. Nielsen. It's a Danish spelling of Nielsen.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here today. And I have loved chatting with you. This has been a long time coordinating, coming, all of the things. And so we will definitely have all of your information in the show notes, and we look forward to connecting with you further.
Thank you so much for having me.